Hi everyone, my name is Eric Carter. I'm a skier and an athlete based in Squamish, British Columbia. Today I'm making this video to talk about ski touring boots and really focusing in on what is a boot quiver and kind of how we can select boots to meet the needs of what we're doing in the mountains. I also know there's a lot of people that are choosing between a few of these different boots and have questions about what the differences are. So hopefully this could help you make that decision and fill out that quiver as best as possible. I'll be talking specifically about these boots that I have from Dynafit and what might be of interest to you if you're looking to buy them. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that not everyone is going to have a quiver of ski boots. And part of this video is to try to address which ones are going to be most useful in most contexts. But I do have a bunch of ski boots. I would say it's mostly for science, but I also work with a shop here in Squamish called Ski Uphill, and they help me out in testing all these boots and then hopefully communicating that back to you guys. I do want to be clear, I'm not sponsored by Dynafit. These are all boots from Ski Uphill, but I do really like how they work for me. This is still going to be very person dependent, very fit dependent, but Dynafit boots tend to fit me very well. And I think they also have one major leg up on most of the competition, and that's in the Hoji lock system. So if you're not familiar, all these boots have a lever at the back. This is what locks together this boot for ski mode. So when I do that up, it's really quite easy to do with one hand or even with the other boot. I can press that down into ski mode. That locks the whole boot into place, and there's lots of videos out there about what is the Hoji system, how it works, and you can go have a look at that. But for me, it's by far the most solid descending feel that I can have with my boots. So that is really important to me. Also, this generation of ski boots from Dynafit solves some of the issues that I had with their previous models like the TLT5 and the TLT6 that had a really, really narrow shell, and that caused some trouble for my feet. With the newer, wider lasts, I'm not having that issue anymore. Keep in mind that all of these impressions are really going to depend on your perspective. So if you're a skimo racer, some of these are going to seem really beefy, and if you're a free rider, some of these are going to seem really light. The most important thing, I think, is which boot's gonna fit your foot. Before we get into the weeds of any of this, if you're looking at boots, make sure you're trying them on before you're deciding between models. The next thing that I wanna talk about is the different categories that I think of for these boots and how I'm using them in the mountains. So the first category is skimo racing. The goal here is uphill as fast as possible and then survive the descents. A lot of folks are using these on-piste and maybe in on-piste or side country type descents. They're typically in less open powder skiing. Ski widths are generally between 60 and 80 millimeters that you're gonna pair with a skimo race boot. Most of these boots have some sort of carbon involved. This has a carbon cuff, but a plastic lower. A lot of skimo race boots are gonna have a plastic lower as well. The liner is often a very small bikini liner that ends here. Sometimes they come up a little higher, but you're really depending on the shell to provide a lot of the driving force of that boot. The next category of boot is what I call Race Plus. And so this is really a race-inspired boot, but something that we're gonna be more comfortable with using in the mountains or for more adventurous type of activity. A couple examples of that would be something like the Pure Genou mountain boot. So it's based on their race boot, but includes a few features that make it more useful in the mountains, mostly a bigger gaiter. Something like the F1LT or the Blacklight from Dynafit would also probably fit in that Race Plus category. Skis here are gonna be in the 70 to 90 underfoot range, most likely. A little bit beefier construction. Really here, we're planning on moving as fast as we can in the mountains, but we want a bit more protection, not necessarily downhill focus. The next category to me is touring. And this is a very broad category, includes touring, ski mountaineering, and all that. Really, it's the kind of day in, day out boot for ski touring, for walking around in the mountain. It still has to have really uphill oriented features. It has to be comfortable. The vast majority of our day is going to be walking uphill when we're touring, but we're getting into slightly more downhill focus. We're looking for ski lines and we want to be able to ski them well. So this boot needs to have that nice balance of uphill comfort and weight and downhill performance. My ski touring boots are typically being used with roughly 90 to 105 millimeter skis. The last category that I'm going to talk about is the beef category. And so this is a primarily downhill oriented boot. It's still a touring boot in that it has a walk mode and hopefully is relatively comfortable to walk in, but the majority of the time that I'm going to be spending wearing this boot, I'm either going to be lift accessed, heli accessed, maybe sledding, and I'm not going to be doing a ton of walking. I really want to have as downhill oriented of a boot as possible. The ski that I'm going to use with this is pretty much going to be bigger than 108 underfoot. For me, this boot has to be compatible with both pin bindings and resort bindings, so I can use this interchangeably with different skis. I find the Race Plus gap with touring to be kind of the biggest gap in this range. I'm going to talk about how these different boots fit into that, but I find race boots to work really well. I find most of our touring boots to work really well, but it's really hard to find something in that Race Plus category where I want to be able to move fast, transitions need to happen fast, efficiency is really important, but we also want that downhill performance. The ski line might be steep, might be technical, might just be good powder and we want to be able to ski fast. And that's where I want to find a boot that fits in that category really well. I do think it's important to point out that boots really should be kind of the last choice of equipment as we're planning our day. So first we want to be looking at conditions and choosing the line for the day. Next thing I'm going to do is choose the skis that are most appropriate for that line. And then finally, the boots that work best with that ski for that kind of day. Okay, so into the individual boots. I do want to cover the DNA because I use it, even though a lot of folks I think might just skip over this section. I've traditionally been a Ski Mo racer. I've used the Pierre Genou race boot, so full carbon upper and lower, very, very thin liner. The problem for me is that I have a little bit of a 6-toe deformity, so that's where this bone on your foot, on the outside of your foot, starts to bulge out. So all of my boots end up getting that 6-toe punch. The problem with the carbon boots is you can't punch those. All that boot is rubbing against any kind of protrusion, and that just makes that much, much worse. For me, those boots started to really get to be unwearable. So I had to find a plastic boot that would be able to be punched out and really fit my foot. The nice thing about the plastic boot also is it does have a little bit more formed of a toe welt that fits well with crampons. This thing has the BOA, which I'm kind of indifferent to. It works fine for me. I haven't had it break. The zipper I worry about a little bit more, but so far so good. The liner itself only comes to just above the ankle bone in the back, but the front of the liner comes up to the top of the cuff here. So we have a little bit more comfort with the liner on this DNA than we do with the pure carbon race boots. It's not the Hoji lock, it's just a lever lock. So this is a big change in Dynafit from their previous Ultra locks, which were sideways. This is just flipped down. And I do find this to feel a little bit more secure. It pops into place really nice, and I like that change. We just have to make sure that we tension the cable here correctly. That takes a little bit of trial and error. The one downside is it is an extremely narrow boot. So it's a 97 millimeter last, but on the flip side, it has a very, very thin liner. So we kind of make up for that narrowness of the actual boot shell with a thinner liner and a little bit more space there. So I find I fit into this just as well as I do the rest of the boots with the wider lasts. Next, I'm going to talk about the Radical Pro. So the Radical Pro has been out for a few years now. It's the successor to the Hoji line of boots, so the Hoji Free and the Hoji Pro Tour. The Radical Pro kind of improves on those, and it improved the fit quite a bit. The Hoji Frees were a very relatively narrow boot and a really narrow heel cup. And so folks had some trouble fitting under those, and then also had trouble getting the upper part of the boot to fit with smaller calves. The Radical Pro solves a lot of that and lost some weight. So it lost about 100 grams off of the Hoji Free. It improved range of motion, going up to 60 degrees of range of motion, which is pretty good for a touring boot, and is a nearly as stiff boot. So with the Hoji Free at 130 flex, and then the Radical Pro at 120. The last increased by about 1.5 millimeters. So the Hoji Free was 102, The Radical Pro is 103.5. And then the forefoot itself is quite a bit wider. So we've got more space for toes, a bigger heel pocket, it's more round, and then we have this instep strap that holds the foot down. So there's space in the heel, but we hold our feet in there really tight with this instep strap. I do find that the liner wears out really quickly on the bottom of the foot, right close to the toes. And I don't know if that's my fit in the liner and then in the boot, or if that's pretty universal. I've found that the soles are really burly. Like, these have been through a lot of rock, a lot of time on sled rails, and just lots of kicking into my bindings. And the soles are really holding up well. You can see a little bit of impact on the heel there from race style bindings, but not too bad. When this boot came out, you could really see its adoption happen quickly in the community. And I think that reflected how good of a touring boot this was. It works really well for skis from 90 underfoot all the way up to 105 underfoot, no problem, and can probably extend out of that range pretty well without too much issue. These boots are going to fit best in that touring class where you've got long days. We're looking for good skiing, so we might be powder skiing or steep skiing, but we need to have the flexibility and the weight that's going to allow us to go all day long. Next, I'm going to talk about the Ridge Pro. So this boot was released at the end of last year, but really went widespread distribution this year. I think out of the box, it looks a little bit less durable or kind of plasticky looking. They're obviously all made out of plastic, but just looking at the top here, the pieces are smaller, and I think that gives a sense of durability. The Ridge Pro weighs in at 1250 grams, so that's almost 300 grams lighter than our Radical Pro. It's a very similar flex. Forward lean is going to be about the same, but we increase to a 70-degree range of motion, which is quite wild. That's matching to the race boot. The last comes down to 101 millimeters, so it's a narrower boot, but it still has a fairly wide toe box. And for me, that was really important. The middle of the boot is a little bit narrower, the toe is a little bit wider, and so that left me space for my sixth toe and for my big toe. I didn't actually punch anything on this boot when I left the store. All I did was get the liner molded, and away I went. That's the first time I've not had to punch boots right out of the box. I find the instep to be a little bit lower on the Ridge Pro compared to the Radical Pro, so I don't have to crank down my instep strap as much. On the Radical Pro, I'm really tightening that instep strap to keep my foot in place. This isn't perfectly instep, it's set up higher a bit for this strap, and then the boa is more the instep. That's what keeps your foot in place. So I have to crank down the boa, but it's not cinching it as tight as I can. This strap really keeps us from sliding forward. So this strap is more of a downhill mode strap for me. I do want to note that the liner that comes with the Ridge Pro is quite decent. I found that the Radical Pro liner I just threw away right away. It was basically unusable. I replaced it with an Intuition. Whereas with the Ridge Pro, I was able to use that liner all of last season. And then just this year, now that that one was kind of worn out, I replaced it with an Intuition liner. I have noticed that the sole of the Ridge Pro is a little bit more rockered than I'm used to. So it's got a little bit more angle there than, say, the Radical Pro or the Tigard. When I've been skiing the Tigard and then moved to the Ridge Pro, that rocker catches me off guard, how walkable this boot is. So if I did have to walk on trail or anything like that, the Ridge Pro is going to be kind of the nicest option for that. But we do have to be careful when we're switching between boots and what to expect. It's a lot more like the DNA. Skiing, I find the Ridge Pro to be really solid. Obviously it has the Hoji lock, so the boot itself comes together really nicely. It doesn't ski quite as hard as the Tigard, especially in chunder and kind of crappy conditions, but I haven't noticed a difference between the ski quality in the Ridge and the ski quality in the Radical Pro. It could be because my Radical Pros are a little bit older and a little bit more worn in, but I'd say the difference is negligible. The Ridge Pros are fairly easy to put on. That's one of the kind of underrated advantages of the Hoji lock system. The boot really opens up. I found it a little bit confusing at first how you line up the tongue with the upper cuff of the Ridge Pro. These wings on the cuff need to be outside and around that tongue. Otherwise, the tongue starts to fold over on itself. We have to be careful with these gold flaps Just like on the Radical Pro, there was a green spoiler and green flaps on the front that sometimes got folded in. On the Ridge Pro, they seem to have taken care of that at the back spoiler. That doesn't get caught anymore, but the front ones still can get kind of folded in there. So we got to be a little bit careful when we put that on. The only other thing I noticed that's a little bit funky is the order of how you strap down and lock in for ski mode. When I'm skinning, I have my Hoji lock open and this buckle open as well, so I have more range of motion. When I go to ski, I have to be careful that I do the Hoji lock first and then this buckle. If I do that out of order, it's a lot harder to press down the Hoji lock. The last boot I'll talk about is the Tigard. Here we've got a 4-buckle, really beef boot. It's 1678 grams, which is quite a bit heavier than the Radical Pro, but really not that much different from the Hoji Free. So if you're used to the Hoji Free, changing to this is not going to be that big of a difference in weight. The big difference is going to be in the sole. So this has the grip walk sole. It's not a full ski touring sole. So if you're thinking about using this to replace a Radical Pro or a Hoji Free for your all-around ski mountaineering boot, this is not the boot that I would look at. These are much, much slipperier. Walking on rocks, any kind of climbing that you're doing feels a lot more awkward with the grip walk sole. The advantage is it's going to fit into any MNC binding, so I can use these on the resort, I can use them heli skiing, and I can use them ski touring. It's a 4-buckle boot. It's rated at 130 flex with 12 or 15 degree lean. And then the range of motion is listed at 70 degrees, which is the same as the Ridge Pro and the DNA. So it says it's as good of range of motion as you can possibly get. That's obviously with all the buckles undone. I find that still a bit of a stretch. I think the range of motion is probably more like the Hoji Free or maybe the Radical Pro in that 55 to 60 degree range. The Tigard fits best for folks with a high instep. So the last is 101 millimeters, which is similar to the Ridge Pro. This arch is nice and high, it's nicely rounded, but then the back of the boot tapers off. And so I do notice that my heel pocket is really, really tight. A little bit bothersome if I leave my boots done up for a long time, but it definitely keeps my heel locked in place. That being said, the liner is quite thick. This is another decent Dynafit liner, so I haven't replaced this one yet. That allows for a lot more molding of that heel pocket to get a really, really good tight fit, a performance fit, less of a walking fit. I did get all my normal punches, my big toe and my 6th toe punch, and then usually by the end of the day, I'm pretty psyched to get this boot off and get my feet into street shoes. So really, this should be considered a pretty big improvement on the Hoji Free, just with weight and kind of performance fit. That's going to fit more people without the narrow toe box. The downside is obviously it's a 4-buckle boot and we need to be aware of that grip walk sole. I'm using this boot primarily with skis that are over 105. I think no problem driving skis down to 100, but if you're using this with a ski that's less than 95 underfoot, I think you're gonna feel pretty overgunned. Okay, so I did get some good questions from folks that wanted to have answered off of Instagram. The first question I got was, what's the fastest color? I will say I don't love the color scheme of the Ridge Pro. I think the black and gold is something, but hopefully they'll come out with a new color scheme pretty soon. Otherwise, I do like the Tigard. I think that green is pretty cool. Another question was, why choose the Tigard for touring? When am I ever using this? And the answer is, like, really when I only care about downhill skiing. Sometimes I'm with slower groups or we're primarily mechanized assisted, and then this is gonna give a really good downhill feel. So I do like to have that ability to use it with a pin binding and get out in the backcountry with it. A huge question that everybody is asking is the Ridge Pro a quiver killer? And that's really what I wanted to cover with this video. I think the Ridge Pro does not quite fit into that lower Race Plus category. It doesn't really compete on weight with the F1 LT, but its downhill performance is so much better than any other Race Plus category boot. It's also gonna be better than a lot of touring category boots. So we're seeing this boot has uphill characteristics approaching our race category. It has downhill characteristics in the touring category and approaching the beef category. Unless I'm with a really fit crew and we're moving really fast, I'm gonna be using this Ridge Pro now in place of what I would have used the F1 LT for before, or my Pierre Genou mountain boot. This is kind of gonna be my all-around ski mountaineering boot and moving fast in the mountains. The DNA is going to step into the place of the F1LT or the Ski Mountain, where I'm doing adventurous activities in the mountains that are purely speed focused. If you have a pair of Radical Pros and they're still in good shape, I wouldn't throw those away and buy the Ridge Pro. But if you're looking in this touring category and maybe in the Race Plus category as well, like if you want to have a boot that covers where the F1LT would sit here all the way up to here, I think the Ridge Pro is a really, really good case for that. It's not a total quiver killer, but I think it does help you build a smaller quiver, again, from Race Plus all the way through touring. Is there a boot that does it all from touring to resort? For me, no. The Tigard probably is going to be the thing that does the most. If you really were only going to have one boot, I would either look at the Tigard if you're more downhill oriented, or the Radical Pro or Ridge Pro if you're more uphill oriented. So if I'm looking at a one boot quiver, I'm probably looking at one of these three boots. If I'm looking at a two boot quiver, I'm going to be looking at Tigard and Ridge Pro. And then for a three boot quiver, I'm adding on the DNA. I've talked a few minutes now about wider boots. And so you might be wondering, if I've got skinny feet, what should I be looking at? Really, I think there is probably less options in the Dynafit line. I'd be probably looking at Scarpa. For skinnier feet, I just can't answer that question super well. I have to generally widen out my boots rather than worrying about them being too wide. Someone asked, is the Ridge Pro strong enough for charging through techie, crud, and bad snow? I'd kind of give that a meh. It can definitely handle bouncing through some crud and some chunder, but it's not something that I'm going to be really, really charging through chunder with. Another person asked why I would want a high or a low volume boot. And I can't really answer that. That's something to ask your boot fitter. It's going to be what fits your foot the most optimally. So really, you need to get in there, try as many boots on in the categories that you're looking at, and then choose one. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. I hope you have a little bit more of an idea about which of these boots might be a good fit for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.